Ronald Todd McNutt was a 44-year-old from Corning, California. He was the father of two and had many different jobs over his adult life. On May 4th, 2004, Ronald dropped off his step-grandson at school. He was supposed to go to work after that. Ronald never arrived. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. Anticipation. Carly Simon sang a song about it, made most famous in a Heinz ketchup commercial from the 1970s. To believe Wikipedia, it says Carly wrote it in about 15 minutes, while waiting for Cat Stevens to pick her up for a date. For the rest of us who aren't famous singers, who aren't waiting for another famous singer to pick us up, that feeling of not being able to sit still while trying to be patient can pop up in a variety of situations. And it can arise from both the good, while waiting to find out the gender of your next baby, while waiting to discover if you got that promotion, while waiting to hear the Powerball numbers, and the bad, while sitting in the doctor's office, while waiting for a biopsy to come back, while watching the last seconds click off and your team is lost, while opening a Christmas present that you know is another pair of socks. But interestingly and ironically, no matter if it's good or bad, we tend to call all those situations the waiting game. As if there are dice and a game board, and all we have to do is pass go to collect $200. Well, in the case of Ronald McNutt, his family has been waiting since 2004. Then the waiting changed to a new form in 2014. Then it changed again in 2017, coinciding with new information revealed by, of all things, a forest fire. But none of this has been a game at all. Instead, all of it has been the waiting work. And now, a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, charleyproject.org. Ron McNutt provided for his family through a variety of means and jobs. He had two daughters with his first wife, Kathy, but that marriage ended in the late 1980s. A few years later, Ron met a woman, Lori, from his church, and they got married in the early 1990s. One of his daughters lived with their mother, while the other lived with Ron. Everything was going fine until Ron got viral encephalitis from a mosquito bite. He almost died and had long-lasting effects of memory loss and confusion. Although in the couple years before his disappearance, Ron was able to remember much of his life. Yet, due to this disease, Ron's second marriage suffered, although he and Lori remained together until he disappeared. So on May 4th, 2004, it was a day like any other. Ron was to drop off his step-grandson at school, then head to work. He dropped the child off, but never arrived at his job. After a couple hours, Ron's employer called his wife. She didn't know where Ron was. He was never seen again. However, an anonymous tip came in saying that Ron had been seen with another man in Ron's truck. Then police discovered that Ron's credit card had been used at a Denny's a couple hours outside of Corning. Yet the employees did not recognize Ron when shown a picture. The case was cold until 2014 when a fire swept through the Etna Summit area in Northern California. It revealed a burned-out Ford pickup that turned out to be Ron's. However, it couldn't be pulled from the ravine for 3 years. When it was, a human skull was found inside. Yet over 2 years later, there are seemingly no results from tests to determine if it's Ron or not. There will be many who will default to the idea those are Ron's remains. However, questions still exist that could cause us to think otherwise. Number one, why did Ron's wife, according to his own family, offer up no assistance in trying to find out what happened to him. Number 2, what are we to make of a conversation Ron had with his mother the day before his disappearance, in which he talked about catching his wife having an inappropriate conversation with another man? And number 3, if it was Ron at that Denny's, why did no one remember him and not recognize a picture of him, even though the police got to that Denny's just days after the disappearance? Ron's family realizes that skull could be Ron, but until that is scientifically proven, they will pursue all possibilities, including one in which Ron was carjacked and taken against his will. The guest for this episode is Ron's daughter, Leslie Littlejohn. Unfound News. I usually don't do previews this far in advance, but next week, Unfound will be bringing to the public an investigation we've been conducting for most of 2019. It was one of those behind-the-scenes projects I've mentioned once in a while. I feel it's time to enlist the public to help move this case forward. This is certainly a disappearance where the on-the-record information describes one kind of scenario, but the information we've uncovered describes something totally different. Next, the Unfound Live Show on YouTube for next Wednesday, November 27th, is up in the air right now. I have some things going on that could get in the way of me being available that night. I will keep all of you posted as we get closer to that date. And finally, I regret to inform all of you that a former guest has passed away. Donna Jean Kapp, sister of missing woman Dorianne Myers, died at the end of October. I didn't even find out until this past weekend. Donna Jean joined us this past summer, but I had known her since 2016. The Unfound family sends its belated condolences to Donna Jean's family and friends. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on YouTube for the Unfound Live Show. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week, I need to thank Angela. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound Podcast. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the daughter of Ronald McNutt, Leslie Littlejohn. Leslie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here, and the listeners know that we have quite a few daughters and sons of missing people on the program, but we'll start talking about your father, Ronald, and what kind of father was he? Was he a laid-back guy? Was he a disciplinarian? How would you explain what kind of father he was to you, and maybe if you have other brothers and sisters?
I have one other sister. She's younger, just by a year and a half. My dad was the most amazing man you would ever know.
Mm-hmm.
He worked so hard and made sure we had everything that we needed, and he was just amazing.
Yeah.
I know everybody says that they had the world's best dad, and I truly believe that I did.
Uh-huh. So was he hard on you and your sister, or were you like his two I'm sure you were two favorite girls, but was he tough on you or easy on you? What would you say?
He was fair. I mean, we didn't really get into trouble too much, but when we did, we got grounded but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, we always got along. We listened to my dad. He never stirred us wrong before, so we always listened to him.
Okay.
And sometimes when I'd get in trouble and he'd ground me, he'd come in the next morning and give me a hug and tell me I wasn't grounded anymore.
Already had a change of heart?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was he into? Let's maybe start here. What did he do for work, for a career, for a job? What did he do?
He worked at Ace Hardware in Corning.
Okay, so would he have been like one of those guys behind the counter? You go in, you tell him you need a particular type of tool or something like that, and he'd help customers out, or what did he do?
Yeah, that's what he did.
That's what he did. And how long did he have that job?
Oh, I'm not even sure. For a few years, I believe.
Mm-hmm. For just a few years, did he do anything else for work besides that? Maybe before that? Maybe in the years before he disappeared.
Before that, he worked at. It's no longer in business, but it was called Cantica, where he was a delivery guy. He delivered like tortillas and chips and turkey and stuff to different stores. And then before that, he worked at Holiday Market almost all of his life.
Okay.
Up until, a good portion of his life was at Holiday Market.
Okay. Okay. And what kind of friends, and did he hang out with, like, the guys a lot, or was he more of a homebody, like after work? Would he come right home, or would he go hang out with some of his friends? What did he do?
Nope, he always came right home to us kids. He actually spent most of his time with us.
Uh-huh.
We did a lot of family things together, like we just on a whim go 4-wheel driving up in the mountains for the day, or we'd go camping or hiking, hunting. He taught us how to shoot guns, so we'd go up in the mountains and do some target shooting. He spent a lot of his time with us.
Okay. What was maybe one of your favorite activities that you would do with your father? You look back, as a girl or teenager. What was one of your favorite activities with your father?
All of them.
All of them?
I loved being around my dad.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite memories is that I was a cheerleader one year, and the next year I wanted to play football and with the guys, and he let me do it. But I also wanted to go hunting with him one weekend, and I had a game. So we drove up to the mountains, a couple hours up where we go. He took me hunting for the day. The next day we drove back down. He sat at my football game, and then we drove right back up in the mountains afterwards and went hunting the very next day. I just loved spending time with my dad.
Okay. All right. Now, one person we haven't talked about is your mother. Now, the listeners maybe already know this, maybe they don't, that when your father disappeared, he had gotten married again, so she would have been your stepmother. But what happened to the relationship, the marriage between your mother and your father? Maybe you need to explain that a little bit. What year did they get divorced, etc.?
They got divorced because my mom had a bad drinking problem, and they just always fought, and it was just better off that they not be together. But they stayed really, really good friends, after the fact. Like, they were still each other's love of their lives. Like, they always said that, but they just couldn't be together.
Yeah. What year did they get divorced, Leslie?
Oh, goodness gracious. I was 7, so I don't even know what year that was.
Okay, we're not going to give. You just said before we started this conversation how old you are, but we're not going to give that. Would you say that they got divorced in the 1980s somewhere? Would that be
somewhere? Yeah.
In the 1980s?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, did your mother get custody of you, or did you live with your father? How did that all work out?
My mom got custody of me. That was not such a great thing. I hate to badmouth my mom because she's doing so wonderful now, but she got into drugs really, really bad. And so when I was 12, almost 13, my dad got custody of me.
Okay. And what about your sister?
She stayed with my mom.
She did.
She's a mama's girl.
Okay. All right, so you two were split up, I guess, then. Okay, so you were kind of both split up then for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so they got divorced, let's just say in the late 80s. And when did your father, we have to remember he disappeared in 2004, but when did he get married again?
I was almost 14. I was 14.
Okay, so sometime maybe in the mid-90s, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's maybe just to use some names. We're not going to use last names. What is your mother's first name, just to keep this all straight? What is your mother's first name?
My birth mother?
Yeah.
Okay, her name's Kathy.
Kathy, okay. And what is your stepmother's name, the woman that your father was married to when he disappeared?
Lori.
Lori, okay. So Kathy and Lori. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so, and how did your father meet Lori?
At church.
Church.
They met it and they started talking, and it's kind of a cute story. They met and my dad wanted to take her out on a date, as soon as possible, but he didn't get his next paycheck for, I think, like 2 weeks. So he didn't have enough money to do what he wanted to do, so I went out in my grandma's yard and I picked weeds, and she paid me 10 cents a weed, which was a bad mistake because I picked a lot. So I ended up paying to take my dad. It was kind of a surprise. I took my dad and her to Cal State, and then we went out to ice cream. So she was really nice to begin with.
Wow. You are special, Leslie. That's very special you did that for your father. Wow. He must have really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Okay, what a great story. That is a great story. Okay. So they ended up getting married, and then did you continue to live with them after they got married?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that maybe mid-90s. Once again, he didn't disappear till 2004, so maybe they were married about 10 years, and we'll get into some of those other things regarding their relationship and, of course, what was going on around the time that he disappeared. But I think something we need to talk about, I think is very important about your father, is he had something happen to him, from what you told me, not long after he and Lori got married. Why don't you tell the listeners what happened?
We went to Oregon to visit my stepbrother, and he got bit by a mosquito and got viral encephalitis and almost died, and it took away almost all of his memory.
Oh my gosh! Were you there when it happened, or did you find out later, or did you go to Oregon?
No, I was there.
You were there.
We all went to Oregon, and we came home, and he thought he had the flu. He was throwing up and stuff, and then he was laying on the couch screaming in pain because his head hurt. And then the next morning, at the time, my sister was living with us for a moment. She came live with us for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We had gotten up to get ready for school, and it was like nothing ever happened, but he was acting really weird. Like he was mixing his chips and salsa with his coffee, and then he kept accusing me and my sister of drinking all of his coffee. And then we were getting ready to go to school, and he was like, no, you're not going to go meet your boyfriend at the end of the road. You don't have school today. And he was just doing some really odd things. So I told my sister, I said, look, you stay home with him, and I'm going to go to school, and I'm going to get a hold of Grandma. Because I didn't know my grandma's phone number right offhand, and I knew the school did because she was our emergency contact.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I got into school, I called my grandma, and she went over there, and the next thing I know, I'm being pulled out of school, and he's being rushed to the hospital, and they told us to prepare for the worst.
Wow. That's how quickly it can happen.
His brain was basically frying.
Oh my gosh! All from a mosquito bite.
Yes.
And that's eventually they figured out what it was, and viral encephalitis, and they said that.
Yes.
Did they find like the mosquito bite on his body that caused it, or not? Or?
I'm not sure how they figured it out. I was pretty young. I was 15, so I was young, and I didn't think to ask those questions.
Right. Okay. Okay. How did your stepmother handle all this when this happened? Your opinion.
My opinion, she turned evil. Let's see. For example, I was on the wrestling team for high school, and my dad was in the hospital. I occasionally would stay late and help put the mats up and stuff, and I called her and told her that I'd be late. I came home, and she got all up in my face, started yelling and screaming at me, and by the end of the fight, which ended about midnight, she had literally thrown me out of the house and told me I could have none of my stuff.
Was this a new kind of behavior for her, in your opinion? She had never been like that before your father got sick?
I mean, she started to before he got sick, but like she tried to tell me I couldn't play football, I couldn't wrestle because I was a girl, and that was a big argument. But my dad always stuck up for me, so it wasn't too bad until he wasn't there to keep her, off my case a little bit. I'm a tomboy, so.
Right. Okay. So, if maybe this is an important question, and we'll get back, of course, to your father's disease this virus that he caught. What kind of parenting role did your stepmother have, being that she's not, your mother, but you're living under the same roof, of course, with her? I mean, how much latitude did she have with, parenting you and discipline, things like that?
Her and my dad were equal, unless my dad thought she was being unfair. But for the most part, like I said, I was a good kid, so I didn't really get in too much trouble.
Okay. Did she have any kids of her own?
Yeah, she has a son and a daughter.
And did they live with you too? You're with you at any time?
Her daughter did.
Her daughter did.
Her daughter did.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So getting back to this, your father gets stung by a mosquito. He gets viral encephalitis. His brain's getting fried. He's losing his memory. And, I mean, how long was it before he was out of the woods? I mean, I'm going to guess for a while you weren't sure if he was going to survive or not. I mean, how long was it before, the doctors told you, he's going to make it?
About a week and a half.
Wow.
A week and a half.
Wow. And you had told me a story that he lost his memory, but he still remembered you. You went in there and he remembered you.
Yes. I went into the hospital, and my grandma had brought my grandpa to see him and had to reintroduce him, and he didn't know who he was. And so when I went in, my grandma was like, "This is your daughter, Leslie." And he goes, "I know that's my daughter, Leslie." And, we got to talking and stuff, and he's like, "I can't remember how old you are, though." I was like, "I'm 15. And he's like, "I'm 16. I was like, "I know you're not, Dad." You're not.
Wow.
So that was interesting, trying to convince him that he couldn't be 16 because I was 15.
And how long was it? And I know that you've told me, so that we can just tell the listeners. In your opinion, maybe he never did get back to the old Ronald. Your old.
No, and the doctors told us that he would never be completely himself.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, his memory had gotten better. He still didn't remember a lot of the past, but he was getting better at remembering short-term things.
Did he, if I can ask, did he understand what happened to him? Could the doctor tell him, you got stung by a mosquito, you got this virus, and did he comprehend that? Did he understand?
Not for a really long time. I actually have a binder that my grandma had given to me that was my dad's, where he had kept a bunch of stuff, and there's a letter from a doctor that they would have to have him read every so often so that he would understand what was going on.
Okay.
But after a while, it sunk in.
Okay. So at some point he did realize that, okay, at some point something happened to me, and that's why sometimes I think these things or don't remember these things that other people do remember.
Yes.
Okay. How long was it before he could, go back to work and, try to get some semblance of normalcy again? How long did it take?
I'm gonna say about a year. He was at IMLO, and they took him to a rehabilitation place that's also in Chico, and then they sent him to another one in Loomis, California, and he was there for quite a while, and that's when things started getting better. So when he came home, it was probably about a year. He started, being able to drive, and then he went back to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm sure that was a very tough period for you. And then I bet being that he did survive and he got to go back to work, I'm sure that made everybody feel better.
Yes.
I'm sure. Okay. So what were the rest of the 90s like once he did get back to, once again, some sort of normalcy? How was his marriage with your stepmother?
Terrible. Like when something like this happens and you bring your loved one home, you're supposed to do like rehabilitation things at home. She wasn't doing anything that she was supposed to be doing. He didn't know what a peach was, if you ate it or what you did with it. He at one point had told my sister and I and my mom that she hoped he'd never get better so he could stay home and take care of everything, and as kids that she could do what she wanted. She was not nice to him. She told him that he was a horrible dad, and he would always tell me that he was sorry for being a horrible dad, and he never was.
Well, by this time, I'm going to say that, you would have been maybe getting, close to adult age. I mean, at some point you became an independent woman. I mean, did you ever confront your stepmother about these things? Maybe in the later 90s about, what she was saying about your dad. Didn't she understand? I mean, did you and she ever have any conversations like that?
I confronted her the day she said it, and she told me she wasn't sorry for the way she felt.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But she and your father remained married.
Yeah.
She didn't leave. He didn't leave. Did he ever say, you know what, I don't know if I could live with her anymore? Did he ever talk about ever getting a divorce from her? To you? Did he ever talk to you about it?
No, not me, no. I mean, but there were signs that he was, starting to distance himself from her. I don't know how to explain it.
Okay, well, we're just gonna.
He would go spend as much time away as from home as he could. Like he goes visit his mom after church on Sundays. Every time he would drive to my house in Oroville and come visit me. He'd spend a lot of time at church because he said that he didn't want to go home because they would fight.
Okay. Speaking of which, what was your grandmother, your father's mother, saying, about all of this? What was she saying?
She, we talked between us, but really, it was my dad's decision, and all we could do is just be there for him. You know, we give him our opinions and stuff, you know, and he wanted to make it work with her because that was his wife.
Sure.
And I think part of that is because he was also told, he had to be reminded many times in the hospital that he was married to her. So, you know, there was letters in the binders telling him who she was. So I think he felt a sense of I can't think of the word I'm thinking of just trying to make it work because he felt, you know, that he was told that that's his wife and, you know.
Sense of loyalty, something like that.
There you go. There you go. That's what I was trying to think of.
Okay. All right. That's why I'm here, Leslie, to try to help my guests out. Okay. All right. When did you get old enough that you finally maybe moved out of the house?
I moved out when she kicked me out when I was 15.
And where'd you go?
I forced my mother to take me back. I showed up on her doorstep and she said, "I don't have room for you." And she left, and when she came home, I had made a bedroom in her closet.
In the closet?
Yeah, she had a big walk-in closet, and I made a bedroom out of it. I didn't have nowhere else to go.
Wow. Okay, so how long did that situation last until maybe, did you finally move out for good and get your own place?
When I was 16, I met my first husband, my kids' dad, and we actually got together because at the time, again, my mother was really strung out on drugs. She had left me at a friend's house and forgot where she left me for a week. And it was somebody that I'd grown up with, and we met at this house, and then we were just inseparable from then on.
Wow.
Until we got divorced.
Okay. All right. And once you moved out, once you got married for the first time, maybe in the later 90s, how often were you talking to and how often were you seeing your father?
I would call my dad almost every day. And then when he started work, we had a thing where he'd come see me Sunday, and then Monday morning before he went to work, I would call him. And then, we'd talk periodically through the week, or it would be the next Sunday, but, it was always once or twice a week. Definitely.
Okay. And how was he doing? Did you see progress in his mental state, remembering more, being able to deal with it more and more, maybe not week to week, maybe month to month or something like that?
Yeah, he liked to play a game with people who didn't know him where he'd say he couldn't remember. And I know my dad, and so he'd try it with me sometimes. And I'd be like, "Dad, I know you better than anybody, and so I don't know why you're trying to bullcrap me right now." He'd be like, okay.
Okay. And how did his friends, support him through all this? Did he have a lot of friends that would come over, and did he remember them, or?
He didn't really have too many friends. Like I said, he was totally devoted to being a family man. He was really close to my Uncle Matt, which is his brother. We spent a lot. It was just a lot of family time, like my grandparents and my uncle and my dad and us kids. It was always, we always did things together. We'd go play softball after church on Sunday, and and my dad just worked.
At any point after he had this happen to him until the time that he disappeared, did you ever get the idea that he might have been depressed, might have been suicidal? Did he ever express anything like that to anybody that you trust?
Expressing that, no, and feeling that, no. My dad would never be the kind of person that would have taken his life.
Okay.
Now the depressed thing, I know he was getting sad I mean, right before the end of, before he disappeared, because him and my stepmom's problems apparently were getting worse. So, I mean, he was sad, but he would open up to my grandma. Again, I don't know what those conversations were because, you know, those, you know, were in confidence, so.
Okay. Did he ever, let's just say in the 3 years before he disappeared, from 2001 to 2004, did he ever take any trips by himself? You know, just not maybe unexpectedly, but just kind of go off by himself for a day at a time with nobody else? You ever hear about anything like that? Know anything like that?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
All right. And at the time of his disappearance, was it just he and your stepmother? They were still married, just living together? Just the two of them?
Yes.
And
yes.
None of her kids were living with them at that time?
No.
Okay. All right. So, in the days and weeks before, you'd already explained maybe how often you were talking to him and seeing him, but let's just go over that one more time. In the days and weeks, so the official disappearance date, May 4th, 2004, let's say starting in March of that year, how often would you say that you saw, how many times would you say you saw him in those last 2 months and talked to him?
I would see him at least once a week, and like clockwork, because I in 2001 and 2003, I had my daughters, so and they were Grandpa's girls, so he came over every Sunday, and then I would call him every Monday, and then occasionally we'd speak through the week on the phone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if he had a church thing, you know how sometimes they have music things or stuff like that, me and my ex-husband would show up and my kids.
Okay. So you were seeing him, and you, in your opinion, he was doing okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there is a story, and this is taking us right before he disappeared. And why don't you tell the listeners of a story that he didn't tell you one-on-one, but he told your grandmother, his mother, about something that he saw at church. Why don't you tell the listeners about this?
Sorry. He had, I guess, it was I don't know if it was after church or before church, but usually people gather and they talk. He had, I guess, apparently found my stepmom around the corner talking to another man, and he wouldn't divulge what the conversation was about to anybody. He just was really upset, and it just pretty much devastated him. So what he overheard, I couldn't even speculate, but in order for him to be that upset, it had to have been something that, you know, you wouldn't want to hear your spouse talking to somebody about.
Do you know how quickly, so he didn't tell you, once again, he did not come to you with this information. He went to your grandmother, correct?
Yes.
And then your grandmother told you?
Yes.
Okay. Did she tell you about this story before or after he disappeared?
Right after, I believe it was the day of the disappearance.
Okay.
When I went over there.
Okay, so when did he allegedly catch his wife, talking to this other guy? Once again, this is alleged, and we'll talk about that a little deeper in a second, but when did this particular thing happen, this church incident?
The day before he went missing.
The day before he went missing.
Yes.
So just to go through the date again, so on May 3rd, you're saying that this is, and then is it your then understanding that as soon as church was over, did he go over to your grandmother's? Did he call her? What did he do?
He went home.
Okay.
And,
Well,
later on, and I believe later on he went to my grandma's to talk to her.
okay. Is there do we have any information if he ever confronted his wife, your stepmother? Her name is Lori. Did he ever confront his wife about this, to your knowledge?
To our knowledge, not that we're aware of.
Okay. All right.
But
Okay.
we don't live in their house.
I know. That's fine. That's why I'm asking to your knowledge. But to be clear, he never said. He just said that I caught my wife talking to this other guy, and they were talking about something that bothered him, and he never told his mother what it was.
No, he didn't. He said he didn't want to talk about what was being said.
Okay.
But he was visibly very upset about it. So.
Okay.
From what my grandma said.
Did he mention the guy's name?
No.
Okay.
We to this day have not figured out who it was that she was talking to.
Okay. Have you or and I realize it's been 15 years. Is your grandmother still alive?
Yes, she is.
Okay. When you did find out about this story, of course you found out it the day that your father disappeared, and we'll get into that, the situation with that in a second. Since then, since 2004, have you or your sister or your grandmother ever asked your stepmother about this story? If whether it was true, who this guy was, if it even happened?
Me and my sister have not. She don't talk to us, and to my knowledge, I don't think my grandma has either.
Okay.
My grandma pretty much is, at the beginning, was trying to be nice, because that was my dad's wife, and we were trying to find him.
Okay. Could this, I need to ask this just because this is the position that I'm in. Is there any possibility, given your father's, of course, what had happened to him, let's say 10 years before this, regarding the viral encephalitis with his memories, etc., is there any possibility that he could have imagined that this happened when it didn't happen?
No.
No possibility of that?
No. Part of his illness didn't include hallucinating. It was just, he just acted weird, and there was no previous, history from when he got sick to then of things like that happening. So.
Okay. What you're saying is your father wasn't a liar, and what you're saying is that in those 10 years
he
since
was not a liar.
And what you're saying is since that happened to him, he didn't necessarily hallucinate anything.
No, that's exactly.
Okay. All right. I just want the listeners to keep that story in mind. And once again, that story happened the day before, but you did not find out about it until after he disappeared the next day. So what do we know about your father's whereabouts, his movements for the day that he disappeared? Where did he start his day out, and what was he supposed to do?
He was supposed to take my stepmom's grandson to school, which isn't very far from his house, and then he was to show up to work, and he dropped the kid off, but he never made it to work, and then his ATM card was used I can't even remember right now exactly where.
Well, that's fine. We'll just talk about that for a second. Was this pretty standard that he would take his step-grandson to school? Was that common?
Yeah.
Okay. And how far was the school from where he was working at the time?
A mile, maybe 2.
Okay. And
really not that far.
Okay. And so he didn't show up for work. He dropped the grandson off but never showed up for work.
Yeah.
Okay. Did his boss ever call, the house asking, hey, where's Ronald? Why is he coming to work today? Is he sick? Did that happen?
I'm not sure how they got a hold of my stepmom. I think they probably called her at work when he didn't show up. And then he had called my grandma to see if she'd seen him. And then my grandma, knowing that, my dad likes to come see me, asked me if maybe he had drove over to come see me, and he hadn't. And
okay. All right, so he doesn't show up for work. The boss calls his wife. Wife seemingly doesn't know, what to think, why he didn't show up for work. And at some point, when did you find out that he didn't show up for work that day?
Right around noon, I got the phone call.
Okay.
From my grandma.
Okay. And when you heard that, how did your grandmother sound? Did she sound worried? What did you two talk about it? What'd you think? Please.
She sounded very worried when I said I hadn't seen him either. And when we were talking, I dropped to the floor on my hands and knees and just started crying. Because that was not like my dad.
Okay. So he had never missed work like that, had never what we would call no call, no show work before?
No.
Okay. And did at some point you or your mother or your grandmother tell your sister that he hadn't shown up as well?
I on my way, because when I got the phone call from my grandma, I jumped in my truck, drove straight to my sister's house, which is like a half hour away from where I live, and told her what was going on, and then we drove to my dad's house.
And when you got to his house, was his wife there? Was it empty? Was anybody there?
My family was there. She was there with a couple of her friends. In my honest opinion, she didn't seem upset. They were over there laughing and giggling off in the corner while my family was sitting there trying to figure out what was going on and in tears. And then later on that day, she went back to work.
At any point, did she or anybody in her family or her friends express any idea of where he could have gone? Of course, this is just 8 hours into this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have been worried or anything like that, but we just don't know. Did anybody call any? Did anybody call any hospitals? Did anybody
know where he would go?
Did anybody call any police departments to see if he got was in a car wreck or hospitals? Anybody do any of that day?
Honestly, that whole day is I'm almost positive my grandma did. I can't say that my stepmom did because, like I said, she went back to work like it was nothing.
Okay. But she nor anybody, of course, she was the one who was seeing him the most. She never offered up any idea as to why he didn't show up. He wasn't technically missing at that time. He just hadn't shown up for work that day. Did she have any opinion on it at all that you remember?
No, she did not.
Okay. But she did find out because his work called him.
Yes.
Okay. So we go through that day. He, of course, doesn't show up for work. Of course, he doesn't come home. Who was the person to file, and we'll get into some of these things, his credit card, etc., in a moment. But who was the person to file a police report regarding him being missing?
I'm honestly not sure if it was her or my grandma. It's been a long time. I'm not sure which one it was, but...
Okay. Would you say that it was done in a timely manner? Would you say it was done the next day? Would you say it was done 3 days later, a week later? Do you even know?
In my opinion, I do believe it was probably done in a timely manner.
Okay.
At least I believe so.
Okay. And did the police do anything? Of course, not only is your father missing, but the truck that he was driving was missing too. Did they put an all points bulletin out for it? Be on the lookout with the license plate? And what do you remember that the police did? Did they talk to the stepmother? And once again, to your knowledge,
they talked to all of us. They talked to my stepmom. They talked to my grandma, my uncle, me. My sister and I were the ones who gave the description of the truck, his license plate, the jewelry that he would have been wearing. My stepmom, for some reason, didn't know the license plate number, couldn't remember the color of the stripe on his truck, nor the stickers that had been on there their entire marriage. They talked to all of us.
Okay. When the police
He even flew some areas, if I remember correctly. I was told by my grandma that they had flown some areas.
Mm-hmm. Like with a helicopter?
Yeah.
Like looking maybe down in some more of the rural areas looking for his truck?
Yeah.
Okay. When the police spoke to you, because once again, I'm sure after 15 years, of course, people's ideas change, their theories change, their opinions change, but the facts don't change. Did you, when you talked to the police, did you ever express an opinion that maybe your stepmother could be involved in the disappearance at the time in 2004? Did you ever tell them that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We asked. I know that she didn't have to submit to it, but we'd asked them if they could possibly get her to at least do a lie detector test, which never happened.
Mm-hmm. And was your opinion based on what you saw, how she behaved the day that he disappeared?
Yes.
It was based on that?
Yes.
Was it?
And we asked them again a couple months later because she did some other just things that were out of character for somebody who had a partner just come up missing.
Okay. We will, of course, talk about that. But, so, your opinion was based on the way she acted that day, and would you say that your opinion was based also on how their marriage had been for those years?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we also have to remember at some point during that day, being that we've already talked about it, you heard this story from your grandmother about what your father had told her the day before. Did you pass this along to the police?
My grandma did.
Okay. So the police, it sounds to me, were well informed of your suspicions, even though there was no facts to support that, but sounds like their marriage might not have been going too well, and then, of course, your father told her this the day before he disappeared. We don't know if that's a coincidence, and unfortunately, like you said, to this day, we don't know who this other guy could have been. Did you and, maybe your sister, other people, drive around town looking for his truck?
We drove everywhere. My grandma made several trips driving around. I drove around. I went to this company in Chico called Jiffy Printing. They were kind enough to print out stacks and stacks of missing posters. We put them from Oroville all the way up to Oregon, and me and my grandma stood at the Corning truck stop, passing them out to the truckers.
Okay. To your knowledge, did your stepmother do anything like that at all? Pass out flyers, post anything?
No, she did not.
Okay. Did any of her family at all get involved? Her children, did any of them get involved in the searches at all?
No, they did not.
Okay. All right. So, and of course, he disappears, and the days turn into weeks, the weeks turn into months, and this is where we start what we call an Unfound the rest of the case. Now, at some point, I'm guessing very shortly after he disappeared, you did get a hit on his ATM or his credit card, something like that. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
It was actually used the day that he went missing at a Denny's. Again, it's been 15 years, but it was going the same direction as where they ended up finding his truck. But it was only used once before my stepmom had the card stopped.
Okay, so how did this get discovered that he used this card? Who found that out?
The police.
The police did. And where was this Denny's? Was it actually in the city that he disappeared from, which of course remind everybody is Corning, California? Was it a Denny's in Corning, California, or was it an hour away, 3 hours away? Where was this Denny's?
It was a couple hours away. I'm not sure exactly what the town is called. I forgot. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. But it was north of Corning, like going toward Oregon?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if the police went up to that Denny's and took your father's picture and showed the people there, like a waitress or a cashier or a cook or somebody? Hey, did you see this guy? Do you know if they did anything like that?
Yes, they did, and they did not remember if they had seen him or not. I guess it's a busy place where they get a lot of business. So.
Okay. And you just said that this was a charge on his card the same day that he disappeared.
Yes.
So conceivably, could be one theory, is that if it was him, that he drops off his step-grandson, chooses not to go to work, starts driving north, gets to this Denny's, and decides to have breakfast there. I'm not saying that's what happened, but maybe to just put it in the listeners' minds, kind of maybe put this, timeline together a little bit. That's how quick it was that his card was used.
Yes.
Okay. All right. But then you said that your stepmother then canceled the cards?
Yes, she did.
Do you think that she did that? Please.
She said she did not want him spending their money.
How do you know? Did she say that to you one-on-one, or did you get that information from somebody else?
From somebody else.
Okay. All right, so she didn't, once again, I just like to make these things important to stress them. She did not say that to you directly.
Not directly, no.
Okay. All right, because that's a fairly weird statement, but you got it secondhand, so I'm not sure. I would certainly like that statement a lot more if she'd said to that one-on-one. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but okay. There was a tip. The next thing I want to talk about, there was a tip. Why don't you tell the listeners that your father was sighted? Maybe you can tell the listeners about that.
He supposedly was sighted with another older gentleman in his vehicle. The tip came in fairly soon after the police report was filed. It came in anonymously. My family do not know anybody that would fit that description. We've never seen my dad with anybody that fit that description.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it was anonymous, so you don't even know if it was a man or a woman who called this in? Nothing.
No, we do not.
And you said it was fairly quickly, so what, the day after he disappeared, or even 2 days, something like that?
Within the first couple days.
Okay. Did this anonymous tipster say where your father and this guy were seen? Was it actually in Corning, California, or was it somewhere else?
I'm not sure. I think they said it was in Corning, if I remember correctly. Again, this has been 15 years.
Right.
But I'm almost positive that they did say it was in Corning.
Okay. All right, so this is interesting because presumably that your father was alone with his step-grandson when he dropped them off? It was just the two of them in the truck, and he dropped them off, so your
Yes.
father would have been by himself. So, conceivably, if this tipster is to be believed, at some point after that, somehow somebody else got into the truck with your father. If this tip is
if that tip is true, then yes. So at some point between the school and work, or the school and whenever, some guy ended up in his truck. If the tip is true.
Okay. And you already said you know the description. I think I've seen a sketch of a sketch artist put this together, right? There's a sketch out there
Yes.
of this person.
Yeah.
And there's nobody that you or your sister or your grandmother know that fits that description to this day.
No.
And has your stepmother been shown that picture? Has she ever said, this looks like so-and-so?
She's seen the picture, and she says she doesn't know who it is either.
Okay. All right, so we have this, and unfortunately we don't know if the police went up to Denny's and in this other town, wherever it was. They can't even verify if your father was with another person or not.
Right.
Couldn't remember him. Okay. Let's go over this church story again. Being that it did happen the day before, and it bothered your father enough that he talked to his mother, your grandmother, about it. Is there anybody, maybe you've looked into this, maybe the police have looked into this, maybe not. Is there anybody that goes to that church that looks like the sketch?
No, there was not.
Okay.
My grandma and my uncle also went to that church, so.
Okay. And let's put it this way. Would never, and we don't want to use a name. Since then, have you ever had a suspicion of who, if your father was telling the truth, who your stepmother might have been talking to?
I do not. I wish I did.
Still don't. Even 15 years later, knowing like you said, your grandmother goes to that church, you two never sat down and say, well, if he's telling the truth, who could she have been talking to inappropriately? And a name, somebody in the church, some single guy, or maybe a guy who was cheating on his wife. None of that's ever popped up.
We don't know. We've tried to figure it out. And again, my dad wouldn't say who it was, so.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk about how your stepmother handled all this. So, of course, he's still missing to this day. And what did she do with her life? What did she do after your father doesn't come back after 4 days or a week or a month? What did she do?
Well, like I said, she didn't. We were told she got mad and didn't want him spending the money. She shut the card off. Within the first month of him being gone, she had taken the money out of the bank account. She changed the locks on the door and gave everything in my dad's, by his pictures, to her kids. I got the pictures, and her kids got his motorcycle, his family heirloom guns, everything. And the same day that he went missing, she went back to work. Like, the way she acted was odd.
Did she try to get him declared deceased?
I'm not sure. I know there was a conversation about you can't do that until he's been missing for 7 years. So I think that maybe her and my grandma had that conversation.
Okay.
If I remember correctly.
Okay.
So I don't know if she has done it, but I know that she was told she couldn't do it till he was missing for 7 years.
Did she continue to live in the house that they lived in together?
For a while, I'm not sure how long. She ended up giving the house to her son, and she went off and got remarried.
How soon after your father disappeared did she get remarried?
I honestly can't answer that question because we don't talk. And she doesn't talk to any of my family. I got this information from an aunt on my mom's side of the family who kind of kept tabs on her for a while. And then she kind of just disappeared. So she said that she had gotten remarried and then she was in the process of getting another divorce the last time I had talked to my aunt.
Okay. Would you say that your stepmother financially benefited from your father disappearing?
Oh, yeah. She, I know that us kids got, when he got sick, we got Social Security. So I'm assuming that when all this happened, she got all the money that was in the bank account. I understand that half of it was hers, but half of it was his. She got the house. I feel like she did.
Okay. Do you know if your father had any sort of will? Did he ever write one up?
As far as I know, he did not.
Okay. That's not totally unusual. Most 40-some-year-old people don't have something like that anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
But they are married. It would be her stuff, too. You would hope that maybe a fair person would maybe, he's missing for a month, he's missing for 6 months. If she's going to start, maybe get rid of some of his things, that maybe you would hope that you and your sister would have been more involved, but you weren't.
No, we were not.
Okay. All right. And you said that she ended up getting married again. I have to ask, the guy that she got married to, does he look anything like the sketch that the tipster gave the police?
I honestly can't answer that question because I have not seen my stepmother since not too long after my dad went missing.
Okay. How many times would you say that you've spoken to her since the day that your father disappeared? How many times?
Probably quite a few in the first, I'd say, couple weeks to a month, and then after that, and after we started getting our suspicions, and she just stopped talking to us. We pretty much just stopped talking to her and went about our own investigations and stuff. And after that, I have not seen or spoke to her, nor do I want to.
Okay. How about your grandmother? Did she have any better luck keeping in contact with Lori or not?
No, it was about the same.
Okay. All right, so this continued. It's a big mystery. Of course, not only is he missing, but his truck's missing. We don't know what to make of this charge at a Denny's north of where he disappeared from. We have this tipster who called in that your father was seen with a guy around your father's age, but that guy was never tracked down. Of course, the truck is missing. Nobody ever saw it, etc., etc., etc. Then, I'm going to guess, out of nowhere, in 2014, so 10 years later, what happened?
There was a forest fire up where his truck was found that burned everything out, and I guess they were doing some land survey through there after the fire, and that's when they found his truck at the bottom of a 300-foot steep ravine.
Wow. And I've checked this on a map, and just so the listeners know, the place is very near what they call Etna Summit, E-T-N-A Summit, which is in Northern California, kind of on the way to Oregon. And like you said, it was the truck was found at the bottom of a ravine.
Yes.
Right. And it was found, would you say that the truck was found by luck?
Yes.
Okay,
If it hadn't have been for that fire, I don't think they ever would have found his truck.
okay, without the fire, and this is, as many people have been listening to Unfound for the last 3 years, sometimes this is just the way things work. So some firemen are, after the fire's gone through, of course the trees are nothing but the trunks maybe, or if not less. It makes things easy to see. There's no more needles on the pine trees, etc. No leaves, and then the truck is seen in this ravine. Do you remember where you were when you got the call that his truck was found?
Yes, I was in Oroville at the casino with my husband when my grandma called me.
And how did you react?
I did not take it well. I ended up leaving in tears.
I bet. That totally makes sense, Leslie. It totally makes sense. So, were you surprised where it was found? Anything when you finally did learn, exactly where it was? Did any sort of thoughts come into your mind at that time in 2014?
Just how did it end up down there? Why was it there? Just, I guess, the typical questions that would go through your head.
Okay. Now, at that time in 2014, did they tell you anything else? Did they tell you about anything that was inside the truck? Anything else?
They found some animal bones at first, and a watch that was my dad's. He wore it every day, and a 45 that my dad carried with him always. That was his favorite gun. He had it for many, many, many years, and his keys.
Okay. But the thing is that even though they found the truck in 2014, they did not remove it from the ravine, did they?
No, they did not. They couldn't because of the weather and where it was at. They needed the right equipment to pull it up from where it was.
That's how deep in this ravine that it was. And by this time, the I Wolf posted some pictures about where the truck was found and all of that. So the listeners will understand that it was found, and like you said, had this fire not happened, it would have never been found where it was. That's correct. Just totally, totally, totally off the road. Okay, yeah, all right.
You could have driven by it every day and never.
Okay, so 2014, they don't have the right equipment, but when do they finally bring the truck out of the ravine?
2017.
3 years later.
Yes.
So for 3 years, you have to sit on pins and needles until they do something about it.
Yes, it was horrible.
I bet. Could they not? What was cars are being pulled out of all sorts of unusual locations all the time. What was it about? I can understand them maybe not doing it right at that day or a week later or something, but 3 years sounds like a long time. What was their explanation for that? What was the explanation?
It was, when they found it was that time of the year. It was really bad weather. It was raining. They said it was very unsafe to try to go down there and move it. I don't know why it took them so long to actually be able to get to the point to where they actually pulled it out. And we never did get an answer why it took so long.
Okay. And how did they identify this as... And my understanding being that this fire, did the truck itself get really burned up because of the fire going through?
Yeah. The pictures that I seen, you could actually see where the metal had melted, and it looked like a puddle, kind of,
Yeah. Okay. Right. How did they end up identifying the truck? Did they have was there a VIN number on
Plate.
the license plate? Okay. And once you did get to see pictures of the truck, do you believe that that is your father's truck?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I ask is it is possible that maybe his license plate was put on a different truck. Things happen, people who want to pull off a crime, who knows to the lengths that they will go, to try to cover something up. And that's why I'm asking. Not only was it his license plate, but the truck, even though it was all burned up, does look like his model of truck.
You could tell it was a Ford, yeah.
Okay. So 2017 comes around. They finally put some time into this. They pull the truck up finally, and what do they find inside?
2 pieces of human skull.
2 pieces of human skull. And once again, I have to ask you, did you know that they were pulling the truck up that day? That they did?
No, I did not.
Okay. How did you find out?
From a news reporter in Oregon got a hold of me on Facebook and wanted to interview me, and so I called my uncle and I was like, well, this is really weird, and my uncle told me, don't talk to him, and I got really mad and really defensive, and I was like, well, why can't I talk to him if it's going to help me find my dad? And then I hung up on my uncle without letting him give me an explanation. He finally texted me and was like, you need to answer your phone. And then when I did, he told me that we needed to go to the Corning Police Department because they had pulled his truck out.
And at some point in there, you found out that 2 pieces of a human skull were in the truck.
Yes.
Were there any other bones? Like you'd already said that originally when they went down there, they found animal bones. But were there any other human bones found? Just the skull, nothing else. No body. I'm not here to be morbid, but any ribs, any femurs, anything?
No.
None.
No.
Okay. Okay.
This is a really wooded area with a lot of wildlife, and I don't want to be morbid. There's a chance that, parts of them were carried away, or.
Sure. Okay. That is a possibility, and right about now, though, I'm sure being that maybe, Leslie, you don't totally realize that, but the listeners do, is that this is a program where we only do unsolved missing persons cases, and they're saying right about now, well, if a skull was found in the truck and it's believed to be Ronald's truck, it would make sense that it's Ronald. Well, there's a problem with all of this, is that, to explain to the listeners for a second, is that his truck was pulled up in September 2017. And at that point, did they tell you that they would be doing a DNA test on it to prove?
Yes.
And we are doing this interview on November 16th, 2019. So 2 years and 2 months later, have you ever gotten the results of that DNA test?
No.
So the skull was tested, and you've never been given the results. Have you talked to the police? What police? I guess it would be Corning, California, that's responsible for your father's disappearance. Is that right?
It's Corning and Siskiyou County Police, because I guess that's the county that the truck was found in. I've called and I've yet to get an answer from call back from them. Like you and I spoke previously, and then I made that phone call afterwards. I'm dealing with some other things right now in my life, but I'm on Monday. I plan to call again.
All right. Well, yeah. So we're doing this on November 16th. So you're saying on November 18th you'll call them, and I hope you will get back to me with that, and the listeners will know if she gets back to me. I'll let all of you know after this interview is over. So that's why we're covering this case, even though there has been what we would call human remains found in the truck. It's still been over 2 years, and you've not gotten any response yet from police or a laboratory, anything regarding whether this is your father or not.
Correct.
All right, whereas they wouldn't even have to do dental. I mean, if they had his skull, maybe they could do like a teeth test or something like that. Match, you know, if you had a dentist, right? What do they call that?
I'm not sure what it's called.
Yeah, I'm kind of having a blank on that as well. But you know, people can. You don't just need you don't always need DNA. You could use, dental records to identify people too. You can do it that way as well. If your father ever had a dentist or had any X-rays done, but to your knowledge, that's not.
Yeah, he did. He had beautiful teeth, but he had some fillings, so I know he's been to a dentist.
Okay, but they've never even done that.
No.
To your knowledge.
Not to my knowledge.
And any explanation for this delay at all? And I realize you're talking to them recently, but maybe even after a year, say sometime in 2018, if you ever talked to them, did they ever give you a reason for the delay?
No.
Okay. Because until some scientist proves that is your father, and we don't know, and I know it's going to be, if it is, I know it's going to be very, very bittersweet for you. You know, you're going to find out where your father is. Now, of course, maybe there still could be foul play, and I'm going to guess that maybe some listeners are going to be open-minded to that, but you'll at least know where he is, but on the other hand, you'll know that, part of the not knowing, will be done. So.
Yes, the not knowing has been the worst. If it's my dad, even if it's 2 little bones, I want to put my dad to rest if that's him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And the listeners, and I'm going to do this in the summation afterwards, I've had a chance to do a Google Street View of the area where the truck was found, and I will be telling the listeners about my findings, after this interview, just so you know, Leslie. And I've already told you, I've told you where the turn is, where the ravine is, etc. And of course, you've never been there, have you?
No, I haven't. I've not been able to bring myself to do it.
Okay. Would you happen to know if, the general area of Etna Summit, was this an area that your father had ever been to before?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Because you had said earlier that you and he used to go hunting, you used to go out and do things together. This was not one of those areas that you two went to?
We would go up above 40 to Pascana or Covelo to go hunting and four-wheeling, and that's not, I mean, it's a nice drive, but it's not, it's definitely not that direction, because I kind of looked it up a little bit the other day with my husband. Where we would go do that stuff it's kind of off the other way a little bit.
Yeah. Do you happen to know, I know you haven't talked to her, but maybe through the grapevine, did you ever find out how your stepmother reacted, being that the truck was found first, and then 3 years later, a skull was found in it? Do you know how your stepmother reacted to any of this?
No, I do not.
Okay. I'm guessing that she knows, right? I mean, surely she knows by this time because it's been, in public domain.
I'm sure she knows.
Okay. All right. I just need to ask you about this again. The listeners are going to find, and I will explain this in my summation. Of course, this road that goes through Etna Summit, very, very windy. It's hilly. It's mountainous area of California. Switchbacks, back and forth, etc. Is there any chance that, your father, with his memory and things the way it was, it's possible that he got lost? If it is him, we don't know if it is, but if it is him in there, is that a possible do you know if he was ever out driving anywhere and got lost due to his memory?
No, not that I know of, but anything is possible. You know, we don't know, and we'll probably never know.
Okay. Okay. Other than what this story that he told your grandmother before he disappeared about catching his wife having an inappropriate conversation with another man, anybody else that your father had a problem with, that maybe had it in for him, any arguments that he got into anybody, any problems that were generated by working at the hardware store, anything like that that you've ever heard about, at the time or any time since that, somebody could have wanted to do something to your father?
Okay, I'm not gonna say this just because I'm his daughter, but everybody who I've ever met that knows my dad or has talked to my dad absolutely loves my dad. They thought he was the funniest guy. I've never known anybody to have a problem with my dad. He was very well liked in the community and by everyone, that I've come across that's met him.
Okay. Has anybody ever come to you since your father disappeared and said, you know what, I think Lori was cheating on your father?
My family.
Well, your family. I'm going to guess somebody else. I'm looking for somebody maybe a little more, just to be honest, maybe a little more objective. Somebody who knew her, who maybe worked with her, was friends with her, maybe a neighbor, who ever came to you after your father disappeared and said, you know what, when your father would go to work and, sometimes I'd see another guy over at the house, or anything like that in the last 15 years?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. It seems to me that this, what you've been through in the last 15 years, Leslie, not just you, but your sister, of course, your grandmother, it's like been two different, situations. For 10 years, you don't know anything. He's gone, the truck's gone, total mystery. And then for the last 5 years, you knew where the truck was, but you didn't know anything about your, possibly human remains being inside of it. And now for the last 2 years, you hear about a skull and you're still waiting. This is one of the most bizarre situations that I've heard of since I started this program. I've covered over 150 missing persons cases. I'm going to guess emotionally it's been very difficult for all of you.
Yes. I took it extremely hard. I'm not even going to lie. I for a long time, I drank really heavy. I got into drugs really bad just so that I can numb the pain and not have to think about it because it hurt too bad. But I've been clean off of everything for the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really hard after that because I tried to numb myself for so long. It's been really, really hard to have to deal with the feelings that I hid from.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about, because we, doing this episode, of course, we hope to move this DNA situation on a little faster. Because it's totally unacceptable for you have to wait 2 years and 2 months for something that I know other people are finding out in weeks. And I'm sure that, of course, in the case of a case now that everybody knows of, the original Night Stalker, they got his DNA and proved it was him within like days. And so, it's the same state. So it just seems totally unacceptable to me, and I'm sure the listeners will feel the same way, that you have to wait this whole time. And I need to ask, have you entertained both scenarios, and do you know how you're going to react? Say they test it and they say, you know what, that's not your father. Do you know how you're going to react to that?
I'm probably going to jump for joy, but I'm still going to be wondering what happened to him. Like, in my mind, to deal with this right now, until it's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that's my dad, I choose to believe that maybe he left my stepmom. He went and he found some beautiful lady who's treating him right, and he's having the life he deserves.
Okay.
But then if they do tell me it's him, I'm sure a piece of me is gonna die inside, but then I'll know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. We can take a moment.
I'm okay.
Okay, lovely. Do you have a Facebook page? Or I know that he is on the Charley Project. I know he's on NAMUS. I know there have been articles written about his case, of course, very recently, of course, when the truck was found, etc. Do you have a Facebook page or anything set up for him?
Yes, it's Help Find Ron McNutt. And then he's also on I put him on NorCal Alliance for the Missing.
Okay. Okie dokie. All right, and do you or somebody in your family manage his page?
I'm in contact with the lady who does.
Okay.
Both pages are ran by the lady who does the NorCal Alliance for the Missing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in contact with her. And I go on the page and I check things out periodically.
Okay. Any final words before we complete this interview, Leslie?
I just pray that nobody ever has to go through this. And those who have, I'm so sorry. This is horrible.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much for taking time to do this for me.
This is what we do, not just myself, but I have many assistants who help me with the program, Leslie, and I know it was my assistant Emily who first got in contact with you and let me know about, I think probably one of the most unique disappearances that we've had on the program, especially considering, everything that you've been through and what's going on. And so I'm happy to have you on the program. I think that we hope to be able to move this forward, this DNA, no, you're like in a kind of purgatory right now. It's just not fair to you and your family. It's just horrible. It's just horrible. It's just not right. It's just not right. And I hope we can change that.
I hope so too, and I appreciate this so much.
And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound, Leslie.
And that was my interview with Leslie Littlejohn, daughter of Ronald McNutt. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. Before I start into my summation, I urge you to go also to the Unfound YouTube channel to see my video presentation of where Ronald's truck was found, along with other information. It is now posted for your viewing. My perception of this case is without this alleged sighting of Ronald with another man that morning, I think I would be 100% sure it's Ronald's skull in his truck. With this sighting, that percentage really only drops to 95% confidence. That doesn't mean foul play did not occur. It doesn't mean that somebody wasn't out to kill Ron. All I'm saying is this anonymous tip does not change my opinion that much as to whose skull it is. Why doesn't it drop lower than that given the sighting? Because I think most of you now know how much faith I put in eyewitness accounts. Not much. And I put even less faith in anonymous tips. So I'm still 95% sure that Ronald went into that ravine by himself. But let's just put this out there, because it's unspoken in the interview. The other theory is that Ronald's wife got someone to kill him. She wanted out of the marriage. She found someone at church to do it, hence the conversation Ronald heard. And that morning, Ronald somehow crossed paths with this guy. The guy killed Ronald, pretended to be him at that Denny's then drove the truck and Ronald's body up to Etna Summit and sent them down into the ravine, and the killer got picked up by someone, maybe even the stepmother herself. Sure, could have happened, and I'm sure many of you will throw even more ideas around. Right now, though, I will pick out something about this scenario that bothers me, and I've talked about this concept before. The concept of context in conversations. I usually mention this when an eyewitness allegedly sees a missing person, even to the point saying they spoke to each other. Usually these kinds of scenarios lack context, meaning in recounting the alleged conversation, the witness doesn't talk about the other parts of the conversation. The best example is the Andy Chapman disappearance. Somebody who knew him supposedly saw him a few years after his disappearance. Yet in recounting the conversation, this friend never asked Andy how he was doing, never asked Andy where he was living, never asked Andy what Andy had been doing since they last saw each other. You know, the usual questions that occur during a conversation when you haven't seen someone for a long time. Secondly, and much like many stories we hear in disappearances involving drugs, it seems Ronald told his mother everything but the important stuff. He said there was a conversation. He said his wife was talking to another man. Ronald said this happened at church. But unlike most people who tell stories like this, and the stories are found out to be true eventually, Ronald doesn't mention how he heard the conversation without them noticing. He doesn't detail the exact contents of the talk. He doesn't explain why he didn't confront them right then and there. He doesn't tell his mother who the other man was. You know, all the important stuff. And I urge all of you to keep this concept of context in mind as you learn more about conversations and witness statements in disappearances. Yet the big problem with this case is Ronald's family should have the DNA results by now. If California can do it for the original Night Stalker case in a matter of days, along with many other cases that have popped up since the skull was found, then the state can determine the identity of the remains for Ronald's as well. Now, I've been told there are backups all over the United States regarding DNA testing. Too many cases, not enough labs, not enough technicians, not enough money, blah, blah, blah. But somehow, everything gets fast-tracked when it's a high-profile case. Why? Because the police, the politicians, and everybody want to look good. It has nothing to do with the law. It has everything to do with attention. To the point that one guy who was involved in the catching of the original Night Stalker is even getting his own TV show now. Yet Ronald McNutt's family still doesn't have their DNA results. You want the reality of the original Night Stalker? He hadn't killed anyone in over 20 years. They knew where he was. They knew he was an old man. They could have kept tabs on him until his DNA was processed like everybody else's. Yet they fast-tracked it for the publicity. Well, Ronald McNutt's family has been grieving and wondering and suffering as much as anyone in the original Night Stalker saga. Sure, Ronald's family hasn't been waiting as long, but it's just as much work. It's time for California to do the DNA test and let the McNutt family know whether the remains are Ronald's or not. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.